Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Arlington. We are a congregation that welcomes all people, people of all backgrounds, races, genders, sexual orientations, abilities and disabilities, both seen and unseen. At UUCA, we encourage people to come for community, find inspiration, and live with purpose together. My name is Burke Kapler. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees and also its chair. Today is Sunday, March 12th, and whether this is your first time worshiping with us, or you've been away for a while, or this is your regular Sunday routine, we're glad you're here. As you've probably heard, we are now 1 week into our annual pledge campaign, Come Sing a Song with Us. Throughout this month, you'll be hearing board members talk about why they pledge, and hopefully why you should too. For me and my wife, Denise, the decision to pledge and to increase our pledge this year came naturally. We have benefited so much from this church throughout our membership. We first came here in 2001 as young married professionals, or DINKs, which mean dual income but no kids. I was a disaffected, soon-to-be ex-Catholic, but Denise had familiarity with a UU church in Louisville, Kentucky, and thought that this might be a good fit for us. Well, she was right. We started coming and we were immediately blown away by the thoughtful and spiritual sermons and the new perspectives on religion they opened to us. I joined a covenant group where I stayed for 17 years, growing through that small group ministry. Along the way, we had our kids, Max and Rachel, and the RE program began to teach them and guide them. First, small lessons about treating people kindly and the 7 principles, but soon moving into bigger lessons about the Old and New Testaments and comparative religion, and then finally their own sexuality through our Whole Lives program. As they grew bigger and more independent, I found I now had time to explore UUCA's other offerings and what they could offer me. I took Faith 360 classes, and I had the chance to contribute to our social justice work through Voice and AFAC. Most recently, I joined the board, and that's what brings me here today. This church has given me and my family so much that it just seems right for us to contribute our time and our treasure. And now, let me suggest a reason that you should consider it too. As you may know, a few weeks ago, a group of board members and lay leaders gathered to develop an annual vision for ministry for the coming church year. This annual vision is a brief statement of 3 goals that will guide the church and its programs in 2023 and 2024. You may have heard this vision described in our other Sunday welcomes, or you may have seen my item in Connections this past week. In a nutshell, and paraphrasing a little bit, those goals are, number 1, to increase participation in anti-racism, anti-oppression, and multicultural training so that we are a more welcoming congregation. Number 2, to center our programming around UU values, however those values may be expressed. And number 3, to grow and deepen the connections between and among us, our members and our friends, through leadership and volunteering. In other words, in this vision, we've said that we want to be a fairer, more just, more welcoming, more connected, more active, more UU congregation. If that is the kind of congregation you want to be, I would ask that you join me in making a pledge to help support it, and I would strongly encourage you to do that today. There will be folks at a table in Fellowship Hall in the back to collect your pledge cards, including me. I'll be there too. I hope you'll stop by. Thank you and welcome to UUCA.
Burke, thank you so much for that welcome. And bells, thank you for ringing us in under Ken's leadership. I want to give a special thank you every Sunday as we are transitioning to new music director leadership for everybody who creates music here. Ken continuing to direct handbells, and Jeff is playing the piano, and Leanna is singing, and I think you might even hear our guest preacher sing later today. So I am so grateful for all of that, and I am grateful for all of you. I want to invite you now to turn toward each other and say good morning, especially to someone you did not come in with today. It is good to be together this morning, as it is good to be together every Sunday morning, and it is good to be together and connected with our friends who are watching from home or from Goodwin House or wherever you may be. We are glad you are with us as well. Our call to worship this morning comes from a favorite book of mine, which I have recommended to you before, and I recommend it again, Spilling the Light by Reverend Teresa Ninan Soto. This piece is titled The Spark Between. There must be fuel, there must be a spark, and there must be oxygen. We have principles and ethics, the fuel of the fire we would light. The spark is what passes between us. Along with our aliveness, our possibility, spirit moving in us is our clear invitation. Embossed, addressed, sealed with wax, tied with ribbon. The spark is a seed of fire that must be treasured and tended, that it may bring the light. We have passion, the air without which nothing thrives, least of all the blaze of covenant, justice, and kindness we would illuminate, both with who we are and what we do. All of these, an invitation to bring to life the blaze of liberation that is meant to light our way and to dispel the fog of cruelty and grief. It brings us instead to a hearth around which we gather to be nourished, energized, and warmed, and where we get ready to disperse, enlivened. May our time of worship together indeed be a time when we feel the spark kindle, so that we may be enlivened.
Ooh, we need fire.
I'm on it.
You got the fire?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's good. Good morning, you all. As we enter this space and we move deeper into this time together, let's go ahead and do two of our rituals that happen every Sunday morning and that join us with other congregations around the globe. The first being our candle of compassion. This morning we light our candle of compassion, again seeking an end to violence and hoping for peace. We open our hearts and we send compassion and strength to the families of those who are still missing in the aftermath of the earthquake in Turkey. There are many still suffering. There are those who are hoping to find and identify their lost loved ones. At last count, over 1,000 people remained unaccounted for. Let us hold them on our hearts and be with them as they journey to put their loved ones to rest. We also support all of those affected by gun violence. Once again, I want to reach out and remind our legislators and public officials they have to take steps to pass meaningful legislation to stem the tide of repetitive gun violence. And I'll end on a brighter note. There is good news. Canada has created a new hotline for immediate mental health help. In the same way that you know what 911 is for, Canada is about to institute 988, specifically for people to call when they are in mental health crisis. The tide of mental health problems and issues is rising. The idea that an entire country is stepping forward to produce something like 988 hopefully will lead the way for other countries to do the same. The stigma of mental health illness is broad. This is the kind of action that shrinks it and that helps people immediately. For these things and more, we light our candle of compassion this morning. And let's light our chalice together. We gather together as a community of memory and hope to celebrate life and its infinite possibilities for love. Please join me. We light this chalice as a symbol of the light within every human heart. May our individual sparks meet and merge, bringing both light and warmth to the world.
Before we sing our opening hymn this morning, I want to let you know how incredibly, I think I said delighted, did you say thrilled, Rev CTC? Thrilled beyond belief, and yet as one faith. Oh, see what I did there? To have with us preaching this morning the Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt. Reverend Dr. Betancourt is the scholar in residence at the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, and you'll be able to hear a little bit about her work there. She also just happens to be the nominee for the next president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, which we're also pretty excited about. It is a joy to have you with us this morning. Thank you. And now I think we should sing, because it is indeed such a joy. We're going to sing hymn number 346, and I'll invite you to rise in body or in spirit. This hymn calls us into community together, and we are singing it all month in different ways. This month, our bells will ring along with us as Leanna leads us in singing.
Good morning, beloveds. Can I invite anyone who's excited to hear a story up close, someone who's young or young at heart or just wanting to hear stories closer in? You don't have to come, but you're super welcome to join me. Come on. Thank you. Hi. Good morning. So I want to tell you a story this morning. It's called The Storyteller by the Sea. And it was written by someone named Joshua Searle White, who I am honored to consider a friend, who's a Unitarian Universalist. I think he's in Pennsylvania again, but for a while I knew him because he was our district executive out in California where I used to live. So, once upon a time, there was a storyteller, and she lived by the sea. And her stories were so famous that they knew about her all around the world, but most people had never met her because she lived on a small island far away. Now, they knew her stories. They said her stories were about strength and courage, and they could make your heart race and your palms sweat. Her stories were so funny sometimes that people laughed so hard that they forgot to breathe, and they had to be given oxygen. Her stories could be so suspenseful sometimes that one time, I swear I would do this, she fell asleep while telling a story. Can you imagine? But it was so interesting, it was so exciting that a whole group of people waited 8 hours. So she woke up again to find out how the story would end. They said her stories could take you on a deep soul journey to inspire you to give up everything you had and spend your life helping others. Her stories could stop wars, they said. They could make people fall in love. They inspired great works of art, all sitting on a palm frond, that's a palm leaf, a long one, under a tree by the water. Now, one day, a group of her admirers decided they wanted to hear her stories in person, up close, like this. So they got together from all around the world, and they went all the way across the Pacific Ocean to get to her island. And when they got there, they got to her village, they decided to go to where she would tell stories every evening. So they went down to the beach near her favorite tree. They found their own palm fronds and sat down to wait. Now, after a while, the sun set over the water, and sure enough, here came the storyteller, and behind her was her assistant carrying a huge platter of tropical fruit. Right? We kind of like to feed each other when we gather. You've probably noticed this. So she sat down on her palm frond under her favorite tree, and the gathered community sat and they looked at her like this. They were excited. They wanted to hear a story. But she just looked out over the water. And finally, someone couldn't bear it any longer. They said, "Please, oh great storyteller, we've come all this way. Won't you tell us a story?" So she leaned over to her assistant and whispered in his ear. She's waiting. Yeah, I know. And they got impatient. And the assistant said, "Our storyteller knows so many stories. Where should she begin?" Now, one person said, okay, my favorite story is the one about the 2 baby alligators who were perfectly happy living in Florida, you know, where baby alligators belong. And it was hot and warm, and the baby alligators were happy until 2 students, college students from Minnesota, on spring break, came to visit. And those 2 college students thought the baby alligators were awesome and that they should maybe take them home. Please don't take any baby alligators home. I don't want phone calls from any of your people, yeah. But they took them all the way home. They stuffed them in their backpacks. They got them all the way home, and then they realized, what's it like in Minnesota right now? Anybody know? It's cold. It's still snowing in Minnesota. And they were worried about the baby alligators who were perfectly happy in the swamp. So they looked for a warm place. And the warmest place they could find was the college president's hot tub. Yeah. So they left the baby alligators and skedaddled. And all was going fine. It was going fine, except the college president had a long day. You ever had a long day, like at school or just, I don't know, things are kind of, anybody had a long day? Yeah, she got home and she wanted to sit school. She wanted to sit in her hot tub, and she did for a minute until she felt baby alligators crawling up her legs. Nope. She flew out of the hot tub, grabbed her robes, put them on, went all the way to the street, and started yelling and woke up the entire neighborhood. By the time everyone was awake and, understanding and expressions of understanding about her scenario, she realized that the alligators actually needed somewhere to be, so she put them in the school swimming pool, and that was going fine until the coach got there the next morning for swim practice, and the traveler just bent over laughing. They couldn't even finish the story. The storyteller laughed. She remembered that story. She thought, okay, I could tell that story, but before she could open her mouth to speak, someone said, no, tell us about the pilot from Argentina. Remember the girl who wanted to fly planes and was so excited she built a plane as her high school science project? And then that wasn't enough. She flew it all the way across the great mountains of Patagonia. But then a storm came up, surprisingly, out of nowhere, and she crashed and had to walk all the way home. It was scary and it took weeks. But that traveler said, but what I loved about that story was when she got home, she was so proud and excited that she had lived her dream. She said it was worth the frightening walk back home. And it made me think about what I was doing with my life, and I changed what I was doing because I realized I wasn't living my dream. And a cacophony broke up. All the travelers were talking about whether they knew that story, how it had changed them, what was happening in their lives. Then they started telling news stories and laughing and eating together, and the storyteller could not get in a word edgewise. She finally put up her hands like this, and everybody grew quiet. And she opened her mouth to tell a story finally, and someone said, "I'm so sorry. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but could you please tell us that story that you tell, that make enemies realize they're not really enemies anymore, and help them to see each other differently for the rest of their lives?" And the storyteller thought she knew which one the person meant and opened her mouth, and someone said, "I know that one. That's the one about the space colony on Mars." Someone else said, "It is not. It is about coal miners getting trapped in a mine in Ukraine." The third person said, "Absolutely not. That's about the kangaroo colony in Australia." You would think that another cacophony would break out, but no, actually the first person said, "Wait a minute, no. It's the story of two friends. Remember, they grew up together, they played, they built forts, they ran through the woods, growling and laughing and chasing each other, and then they grew up. This happens. They grew up and they lost track of each other. But they ended up as the leaders of two groups of people with very different thoughts about how life should go." Yeah. And it was a hard time in their country. It was a time when people were worried that the differences of what people believed might make them fight. It might get serious enough to start a war. And these two friends finally saw each other again for the first time in a long time, and they each had their groups at their backs. They were yelling at each other on the steps of a government building. We've seen this. They were yelling at each other at the steps of the government building, and the first friend looked at his friend, and this strange thing happened. He saw his friend as he used to be. He remembered building forts. He remembered pretending to be otters and slithering on their bellies down a bank into the river. He remembered how they used to play at being wolves, creeping quietly through the forest. He remembered and felt all of a sudden that he saw his childhood friend in front of him. And he was so moved by the love he had for his friend that he just fell to his knees and he said, wait a minute, I am you." And his friend looked at him and fell to his knees and said, "Wait a minute, I am you." And they stood there and looked at each other. Now, the people around them couldn't really hear what they were saying, but they knew something was happening. And folks who were there watching later said that you couldn't really hear it at first, but something was happening. People were turning to each other, and you could hear it. "I am you. I am you." Some said it was the voice of friendship. Some said it was the voice of love. Some said it was the voice of God. But what we heard was, "I am you." And there was no fight that day. And in fact, a war never broke out. The two groups decided to try again to talk to each other. "Won't you tell us that story?" And the storyteller, of course, knew that story. It was the most important story she told. But she had heard it in its entirety from the traveler, and she knew there was nothing else really that needed to be said. So she was quiet. And the group started telling each other stories. Again, they started laughing again after a while. They ate a lot of pineapple. And they told stories until the sun came up again the next morning. And they realized how tired they were. They lay down on the sand and they went to sleep. And the storyteller finally stood up and she looked at all of them and she said, "I am you." And she lay down and went to sleep. And that is the end of our story. Thank you for coming up and joining me.
Reverend Dr. Sophia, thank you so much for that story, and thank you for being our story listeners this morning. I want to invite you now to go to your classes along with your teachers. Thank you to the tigers and the bunnies who joined us too as we sing you on your way.
Peace to you on your way. May you grow in love each day, meeting new friends and opening your mind to the wonders of the world you will find. To the wonders of the world you will find.
Last Sunday, we talked about what it would mean to be a congregation of being, not just doing. And so I want to invite you in this time of prayer and meditation, this time of quiet, to just be. Close your eyes if you'd like to, or soften your gaze to center yourself. Make your body as comfortable as it can be today in this space, in your seat, at home, or here in the sanctuary. Take a breath together. Just be. Spirit of life and love, God of many names, Spirit who whispers, I am you. Help us in this moment to be. To be our fullest, most joyful selves, or our deepest, most sorrowful ones. Help us to be with all we have brought in this morning, our worries, our hopes. Help us to be in this moment, just here. As we breathe in together and out in the silence, help us to remember each one of us is being and becoming. Spirit of life and love, I am you. You are me, and together we can be. May it be so. Amen.
Please stand as you're willing and able to sing Spirit of Life's hymn number 123.
This is a congregation that gives. We give from the head, we give from the heart, we give from the spirit. In this month of March, our offering is going to support a few different causes. Today's offering will be shared with the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, the UUSC. What is the UUSC? It's a nonprofit, non-sectarian organization that works to advance the fight for human rights. They collaborate with an international community of grassroots partners and advocates. Pardon me. The UUSC's work is focused on the intersecting roots of justice. They support self-determination. They protect the rights of people displaced due to climate, conflict, or economic hardships, and they respond to humanitarian crises. There are many ways that you can give this morning. We will take your cash and coins. You can write a check and simply put "share the plate" on the memo line, or you can go to our website at www.uucava.org and hit that donate button. Please remember that when we take an offering on Sunday, 30% of it stays within the congregation to support our work. 70% of it goes directly to the organization that we want to offer support to. The UUSC, plain and simple, does amazing work around the globe to support others as they struggle and fight for human rights. Please give as generously as possible. Will the ushers please come forward and take an offering? I often stand here and say we are blessed with amazing music. I will just say it again. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Bells. Will the ushers please bring the offering forward? One thing I forgot to say when I told you about the UUSC, They do an amazing amount of work, and it's hard in 2 minutes of introduction to explain that to you. So I invite you to go to www.uusc.org and learn more about this organization. Please take a few minutes and do that today. We bless and receive these gifts, opening our hearts to true generosity. Please join me. Let us be grateful when we give, be it time, talent, or treasure. Let us be grateful for our needs and the experience of vulnerability. Let us be grateful for those who share their gifts to nurture this congregation.
As we celebrate our 75th anniversary this year, and I invite you, when you go for coffee in Fellowship Hall, to see the many hands already on our 75th anniversary banner and to add your own, whether you joined 3 decades ago or 20 minutes ago, this community. As we celebrate our 75th, we've had the opportunity to hear from people about programs and experiences here at UUCA over the years, and I'm so pleased that Carol Hopper is here to tell us about the beautiful space we find ourselves in here in the sanctuary, or we watch from afar this morning. Thank you, Carol.
Good morning. I've been an active member of this congregation for longer than I can remember. Thank you. Our church archives provide a rich collection of ministerial and worship history, countless social justice activities, all types of intergenerational education, retreats, musical performances, and plenty of picnics. I think we've outgrown picnics. During World War II gas rationing, the Arlington members of All Souls Church met in their various homes and schools on this side of the Potomac River. After 11 years, our fledgling congregation had purchased all of this 4.5 acres of property and saved enough funds to build a simple brick building which housed all the offices and indoor church activities. A rudimentary playground was in place, and our minister lived in the brick home where our wonderful custodian family lived today. We outgrew our building, and in 1960 created this new sanctuary, designed by a famous regional architect, Charles Goodman. Goodman was part of the team that designed the main passenger terminal at National Airport. When he applied to become our architect, he presented to the building committee a 4-page careful study of our church property and of our church membership. He presented the congregation his vision of a sanctuary for Unitarian Universalists. The result we have is a great, modern, award-winning, very sturdy concrete temple structure, which has relatively no maintenance needs for both interior and exterior walls. Mr. Goodman also designed the sanctuary platform furnishings, the pulpit. There was an upright wood wall, obviously, a large planter, I don't know where that's gone, and side wall benches. Now, the side wall benches you'll find in European old churches. So, though a very modern structure, he introduced something too from history. His plan also called for a tall black metal wall candle sconce, which of course is supposed to belong here. At the sanctuary exterior, our concrete foundation is recessed, and the entrance staircases appear to float. We have a ribbon of clear-story windows and an overhanging roof to deflect rain. In architectural lingo, this is called a ribbon, which is another trick to make it appear that the roof also floats and brings in a controlled source of natural light. Finally, a passerby cannot ignore our sturdy modern temple, for it was purposefully positioned on the hilltop of our property to say, we come from strong traditions and we're here to stay. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
Actually really lovely to learn about this congregation and its history. Thank you for that. Our reading this morning is called The Garden of Abu Mahmoud by the poet Naomi Shihab Nye. He had also lived in Spain, so we stood under a glossy loquat tree telling of madres y milagros with clumsy tongues. It seemed strange in the mouth of this Arab, but no more so than everything. Across his valley, the military settlement gleamed white. He said, "That's where the guns live," as simply as saying it needs sun. A plant needs sun. He stooped to unsheath an eggplant from its nest of leaves, purple, shining globe, and pressed it on me. I said, No, I don't want to take things before they are ripe. But it was started already. Handfuls of marble-sized peaches, hard green mishmish, and delicate lilt of beans. Each pocket swelled as he breathed mint leaves and bit the jagged edge. He said every morning found him here. Before the water boiled on the flame, he came out to this garden, dug hands into earth, saying, "I know you." And earth crumbled rich layers. And this result of their knowing, a hillside in which no inch went unsung. His enormous onions held light, and trees so weighted with fruits that he tied the branches up. And he called it querido, corazón, all the words of any language connecting to the deep place of darkness and seed. He called it Ya Habibi in Arabic, my darling tomato, and it called him governor, king, and some days he wore no shoes. West Bank. This is the season where I press the tiniest seeds into peat pods and stash them under lights all around my house, away from the cats, so not all around the house, but close. And this is an attempt to get ahead of these cold winds that are trying to delay my love of gardening. It's just my second growing season here in the DMV. I moved about 1.5 years ago, and I'm aware of how much I still have to learn about the land where I now find myself at home. And so I soak the pods in water, I add meticulous labels and seeds, and I snug them up under the grow lights. And as I do so, I'm mindful of how often choice is removed from the blessing of growing things, of how food and farming are too often linked to violence or displacement, and how our partners in the work of migrant justice and climate justice might feel a different weight when planting seeds. It is my profound privilege to play a small part in the ongoing work of our Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, the work that it does to foster human rights around the world. I also serve as our advisor on justice and equity and get to be in the most moving conversations. At UUSC, we regularly engage with the work of our partners around the globe who are organizing for justice, justice for migrants, justice for Earth itself, justice in a range of crisis moments that impact our very survival. And we follow the leadership of frontline communities, those most directly impacted by whatever threatens rights or well-being, and we do our best to provide the type of resources that are most needed to support those leaders in their work for change. Everything we do is in service of the dignity and power of all peoples. Does that language resonate for you? It sounds like the first principle, right? The inherent worth and dignity of all peoples. UUSC is in service of the dignity and power of all peoples. And I'm reminded of how very humanizing it is to labor for the rights of all. Now, one of the oldest questions that religious communities ask themselves, most of us do, it's a core category in the study of theology, is what does it even mean to be human? How do we know ourselves in the world? What calls us into being, and how are we to understand the purpose of our living? I'm reminded of these questions every time my colleague, the Reverend Deanna Vandiver, talks about what it means to human and to humane together. Reverend Deanna is our Director of Justice Education at UUSC, and in that role, she manages our UU College of Social Justice. If you've ever gone on a trip with UUSC or been to a training or organized with other UUs, that is at the core of their work. All right, so the work of the college is to inspire and sustain effective and spiritually grounded activism for justice. Essentially, their goal is to help us human and humane with one another. Now, I want to pause and say, I know that the language of human rights, right, often brings to mind powerful proclamations from mighty institutions that can feel a little bit distant. Right, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was finalized at the United Nations General Assembly in 1948. Human rights sometimes reminds me of my old philosophy classes and the expression of values in such idealized language that at times it would feel to me like it had no bearing on real people's day-to-day actual lives. And in those moments, what I want is tangible reminders of how everything we value in our living is at stake, moment by moment around the world, even when we forget, even when it is not impacting us on that day. And I think that each of us can probably bring to mind basic rights that we believe everyone deserves, and stories from our own cultures, histories, or lived experiences where those rights have been threatened. I mean things like the right to live free from slavery, to be treated equally in society. We're supposed to have the right to marry and have families and to express what we believe. Education is a right. So is work. So are clean air and access to clean water. So are the safety and protection of our children. So is asylum in another country when you are facing persecution in your own. And each of these, and so many more, are routinely threatened, not just somewhere else, but here, in our neighborhoods, here, for members of this beloved community. My theological wrestling with what it means to be human longs for reminders of joy, of praise. I want shared meals and cool glasses of water drawn directly from the earth. I make decisions, or I think about what being human means to me, from the love and family and migration and fossil fuels, all of these things that come up in our lives. I think about them based on the babies I've had the privilege to hold in my arms, and the children whom I may never know, but whose promise I believe in fiercely. My longing to know what it means to be human revels in the words of poet Naomi Shihab Nye, who reminds us of madres y milagros, mothers and miracles, while describing a lush garden near a military settlement on the West Bank. Naomi Shihab Nye is a Palestinian-American poet whose father was a Palestinian refugee. And I was stunned to learn she was raised in Ferguson, Missouri, and Palestine. And she's been shaped by the histories and struggles of both places. And part of what I appreciate about her writing is that she speaks directly to injustice while holding the humanity of everyone at the center of her work. When she writes of Palestine, of Jerusalem, or the West Bank, she unflinchingly describes injustice, yes, and holds Israeli and Palestinian people as holy and whole in her writings. She writes about the struggles of both mattering. So the struggles of two communities with profound histories of persecution is described through the interactions of neighbors who, as often as not, love one another. We love one another, even in times of crisis. Right? And this does not mean that she isn't arguing for the rights of her people. She is. But it means she tries to hold a view that is wide enough for the rights of all. And I find this in human rights work, that it is humanizing across whatever the conflict is, and that the stories matter. So it matters to me that we encounter the Garden of Abu Mahmoud in descriptions of the West Bank. How many of you would instinctively understand why Nye's friend, on hearing that her parents chose to raise her in Ferguson and Palestine, would say, "Wow, your parents really picked the garden spots, didn't they?" When I hear those two place names, I think horribly, right? I think of police brutality. I think of occupation. I think of genocide and government-sanctioned violence. And I forget to think about eggplants and peaches with the sweet herbal flavor of mint. I need this reminder that the blessings of life continue even in unspeakable moments. That when we reach out in partnership with those laboring for the benefit of their own countries and communities, we are not only fighting for a list of human rights cataloged at the United Nations, we are investing in what it means to someone else to live a fully human life. And this is how I begin again to know my own humanity. This is how I am willingly vulnerable to how precious our humanity is, to how devastating it becomes when we turn to one another with hatred or violate the very humanity that we know is sacred in each person. I'm a theology professor. By now, I thought I would know what I believed about what it means to be human. This knowing, right, and then stretching, and then asking maybe questions, and then knowing again for a while. It's all part of a spiritual journey. And then these years of COVID and unequal access to life-saving treatments and vaccines across the globe, they have me asking once again what I believe. You know, at UUSC, when we gather with our partners, we have COVID standards and requirements for each other, but we can't have them for our partner because the majority of those groups have not yet had access to a single vaccine. Right, these years have me asking, how much am I willing and able to give of myself while our nation in these days is in immense ideological struggles, when the very values we hold most dear are disputed in our halls of government? What does it mean to be human? How is that impacted when we seek to control another person's gender or their right to reproductive freedom? What is asked of us? How much can we give? And perhaps more urgently, how do I stay connected to my values in the world when I've gotten so very tired? When all of us are struggling with the long-term impact of communal trauma, we are. We can get so weary, beloveds, legitimately weary. Please hear me say those two words, legitimately weary. Right? And in those moments, too often we try to tell ourselves to just do better. Be a better Unitarian Universalist, right? Some version of self-judgment that rarely motivates us to help someone who we do not know. And usually it makes us actually more tired. Right? Right? In these moments, I want to invite us to turn instead to what it means to human and to humane together. To remember that near a military encampment on the West Bank, there are trees so well loved that their branches need extra support just to hold the fruit they are producing. I want us to share the gleanings of others' languages so that our mouths might be filled with praise. I want us to love a hillside near our own homes so much that no inch of its slope goes unsung. I believe our humanity is grounded in the goodness of what can be in this life, that it grows in response to the simple understanding that together we can contribute to the well-being of all. The tides of violence and uncertainty, illness and strife constantly offer us this lie. We are told a lie again and again that we exist separately from each other, that we are in a constant state of competition, that there will never be enough, that we can never be enough, and that it's not even worth trying. But our organizers, our activists, may they be forever blessed, they work tirelessly to remind us that our greatest power manifests through our connections to each other and through the disruption of patterns that try to discourage us from believing in our own wholeness. For over 80 years, UUSC has centered the belief that all people, right, as I said, have inherent power and dignity in their work to advance human rights, to advance social justice across the globe. And we do that work in a way that is partner-led, right, which means that those who do the work, the hands-on work to confront unjust power structures, those who mobilize to challenge oppressive policies in their own communities, they get to decide how to shape the work for themselves. There's this wide range of support that UUSC offers our partners. We offer research, education, media strategies, and advising, all of this in addition to financial grants. Right? And all of that allows our partners to prioritize what is most needed in their own communities, rather than reshaping themselves to match specialized grant requirements in order to secure funding. This is why our partners are often the smallest organizations. They're run by the most impacted people, and most of them say that UUSC was the first organization to support their work. It is so rare in the world of justice making to allow the voices of those who know best how to emphasize the wholeness and value of their communities rather than being turned into some inspiration story to convince us to contribute. It is rare that we remind one another of our humanity as we work for human rights. And I believe that this investment in communities outside of our own is how we know ourselves to be human, to be holy and whole. It is not about charity. It was never about charity, and it is not remotely about knowing the best way forward ourselves. It is instead about trusting in our beloved's own knowing and experiencing gratitude that we are invited to be part of their solutions. It matters to me that our faith tradition invites us to draw on the love at the heart of our Universalist teachings as a catalyzing fuel for change in the world. Unitarian Universalism encourages us it encourages us to compassionate, and I would say to informed generosity, and it challenges us to foster real relationships. In essence, to know that we cannot fully understand our purpose in this life without connections born of love, of curiosity and respect. We are not meant to be quiet about our values. Instead, we are asked to be the change that we wish to see in the world, or better still, to be the change that we are and can be in the world. This is the work of faithfulness. This is love made manifest by a justice-seeking people. And so I cannot thank you enough for your support of our Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. This beloved institution carries a legacy of justice making through both our Unitarian and our Universalist forebears that takes us all the way back to responding to the human rights violations that led to World War II, sometimes at great personal risk. Those same violations led to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in the United Nations in 1948. Our human rights legacy reminds us that the value of our efforts bears fruit in each generation and will bear fruit for generations to come. We have everything we need to make a difference against the tides of injustice around the globe, and no amount of weariness or even collective exhaustion, which I know is real, can fully separate us from what we know about our own humanity. Do not despair, beloveds. Do what you can, do what you feel you must, and trust that other members of this community and our faith tradition as a whole are also doing their part. That collectively we are stronger than we know. And together we will carry this powerful legacy forward. May we each find moments of renewal in the coming days and months. May our beloveds, laboring in the halls of government, protesting in the streets, nurturing seeds and fields around the world, feel the power of our love and commitment, lending them strength. May all those in harm's way be protected and know the goodness of what can be in this life. And may we continue to grow collectively as a people as we vision a new world into being. May it be so. Amen. Ashe, and blessed be.
The next hymn is number 1035 in your teal hymnal. But before you get it out, we're just going to teach it to you by ear. You don't even have to get it out. And the song is from South Africa, where it was an inspirational freedom song during the anti-apartheid movement. And it has two parts. And in the second part, there's a little hitch, which you'll detect once we sing it. Reverend Sophia is going to help sing it. Yes, please stand up.
Sorry. Get up. You are hilarious.
There we go. We're in it.
Freedom is coming, oh yes, I know. Freedom is coming, freedom is coming, freedom is coming, oh yes, I know. Oh yes, I know. Oh yes, I know. Oh yes, I know. No. Oh yes, I know. Oh yes, I know. Oh yes, I know. Oh yes, I know. Oh yes, I know.
So here's the thing. I want to invite you not to sing with me, because this song is syncopated, so you are going to sing with Leanne. Does that make sense? You're going to hear me, and yes, and with our beloveds, but don't sing with me. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom, freedom is coming. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom, freedom is coming. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom, freedom is coming. Oh, yes, oh, freedom, freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh, yes, oh, yes, I know. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming.
Oh, yes, I know.
Yes, I know.
Oh,
Freedom
yes,
is
I
coming.
know. Oh, yes, I know.
Freedom.
Oh, yes, I know.
Freedom.
Oh, yes, I know.
Freedom.
Oh, yes,
Freedom is
I
coming.
know. Oh, yes, I know. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh, yes, I know.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Look at 11:15 going. All right. Friends, before we extinguish our chalice and are sent off with a good word, I want to thank Reverend Dr. Sophia for being with us to talk about the work of the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. As we mentioned, it just so happens that she is the nominee for president of the Unitarian Universalist Association. And if you are interested in her vision for Unitarian Universalism, I do want to encourage you to come next Saturday when we are hosting one of only 4, I think, presidential forums in the country. It's happening right here. We are very excited to host. It will also be live streamed. And at that time, you will hear yet more wisdom about Reverend Dr. Sophia Bettencourt's vision for Unitarian Universalism. So please do come to that. It's at 1 o'clock. It is at 1 p.m. on Saturday. Thank you very much. This PSA is now complete.
Please join me in the words to extinguish our chalice. They are in your order of service. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light and warmth it represents. These we carry with us, bringing our sparks of love to the world.
Beloveds, may we rest nurtured in the beauty and the joy and the love and the 75 years of this remarkable community. I know that a lot is difficult in life right now, and so I would invite you to hold fast to each other. Hold fast to those moments that surprise you when things go well. Hold fast to who we know we are in the world, and show up fully as you are called to be. Amen. We'll see you next week.